Take everything off. Let us see. Three men mocked. Obese girl before mountain man kicks them. The winter of 1883 descended upon Montana territory like a cruel judge, blanketing the land in unforgiving white. Dust Creek was not a town where mercy lived. It was a place where whiskey flowed cheaper than water, where men settled disputes with lead and fury, and where the weak learned quickly to hide or die. The marketplace stood in the valley's heart, a collection of rickety stalls and canvas tents where trappers sold beaver pelts, ranchers traded horses, and occasionally human dignity changed hands for far less than it was worth. Eliza Mayfield knew this truth better than most. She was 23 years old, though the hardness in her eyes might have suggested 30. Her body was large, not in the way of wealthy women who grew plump from leisure, but in the heavy, solid way of someone whose flesh seemed determined to exist despite a life that offered little nourishment for the soul. She had been orphaned at 12 when cholera swept through a wagon train heading west. The Holloways, who ran the Dusty Rose boarding house, had taken her in not from kindness, but from practicality. They needed someone to scrub floors, empty chamber pots, and endure the wandering hands of drunk miners without complaint. This morning, Eliza carried a wicker basket filled with sourdough rolls she had baked before dawn. Mrs. Holloway allowed her to sell them at market, keeping 70% of the profit. It was the only way Eliza could save coins toward a future she couldn't quite imagine, but desperately needed to believe in. The November cold bit through her worn wool coat as she made her way down the muddy main street. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. Other vendors were already setting up. Old Jeremiah with his smoked venison, the widow Chen with her hand-sewn gloves, and the Miller brothers with their moonshine that could strip paint from wood. Eliza found her usual spot near the blacksmith's forge, where the residual heat provided some comfort. She arranged her rolls carefully on a clean cloth, each one golden brown and still faintly warm. She had gotten better at baking over the years. It was perhaps the only thing she took pride in. "Well, look what the hog dragged in." The voice cut through the morning bustle like a rusty blade. Eliza's stomach clenched before she even looked up. Wade Garrett stood before her stall, flanked by his usual companions, Pike, a wiry cowboy with a mean streak and rotted teeth, and Tom Bulldog McGraw, a horse trader whose nickname came from both his appearance and his temperament. All three reeked of last night's whiskey, their eyes bloodshot and cruel. "Morning, Mr. Garrett," Eliza said quietly, keeping her gaze on her rolls. "Fresh baked this morning if you're interested." Wade leaned against the stall post, his lips curling into a smirk. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, the kind of man who knew it and weaponized it. Interested? In what? Bread that probably tastes like lard, made by a woman who looks like she ate half the batch? Pike snickered, and Bulldog let out a bark of laughter that attracted attention from nearby vendors. A small crowd began to form, drawn by the promise of entertainment at someone else's expense. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she remained silent. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. "Cat got your tongue, girl," Wade continued, circling her stall like a predator. "Or maybe you're just too busy thinking about eating these rolls yourself. Lord knows you don't need any more." "Leave her be, Wade," called out old Jeremiah from his stall. "She ain't bothering nobody." "Stay out of it, old man," Pike snapped. unless you want your venison in the dirt. Wade picked up one of Eliza's rolls, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. You know what? I might consider buying these, but I got to know what I'm purchasing from. Quality control, you understand? He pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and flipped it onto the muddy ground at Eliza's feet. Take everything off. Let us see what we're paying for. The words hung in the frozen air like a curse. The growing crowd went silent, some faces showing shock, others dark amusement. Eliza's world narrowed to a pinpoint. Her hands began to tremble, and she felt her throat close up. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. Come on now, don't be shy. Wade pressed, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. We're all adults here. Show us if the goods match the packaging. Pike and Bulldog howled with laughter. A few men in the crowd chuckled nervously. Most just watched, their silence a form of complicity that cut deeper than any insult. Eliza stood frozen, her mind screaming at her to run, to fight back, to do anything, but her body remained rooted in place, paralyzed by humiliation and fear. I said, Wade reached toward her shawl, You got a death wish, boy? The voice was low, gravelly, and carried the weight of mountains. It cut through the jeering like an axe through rotten wood. The crowd parted, and a man emerged from the shadows between stalls. Jacob Boone Callahan was not the kind of man you forgot if you saw him once. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed built for carrying the weight of the wilderness itself. His face was weathered and bearded, partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat covered in snow. He wore a coat made of bear hide, and his eyes, cold, gray, and utterly uncompromising, fixed on Wade with the intensity of a wolf sizing up prey. Nobody knew much about Boone. He appeared in Dust Creek maybe 3 or 4 times a year to trade furs and buy supplies before disappearing back into the Bitterroot Mountains. Rumors swirled around him like smoke, that he'd been an army scout, that he'd killed a grizzly with just a knife, that he'd lost his family to raiders and had hunted down every last one of them. The stories varied, but everyone agreed on one thing. You didn't cross the mountain man. This ain't your concern, Wade said, but his voice had lost some of its swagger. He'd heard the stories, too. Boone took 3 deliberate steps forward, his boots squelching in the mud. I'm making it my concern. We're just having a bit of fun with the girl, Pike offered, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. No harm meant. That right? Boone's gaze never left Wade. Seems to me you're 3 grown men humiliating a woman just trying to make an honest living. That don't sound like fun. That sounds like cowardice. Wade's face flushed red. You calling me a coward? I'm calling it like I see it. Boone glanced at Eliza, his expression softening for just a fraction of a second. Miss, you okay? Eliza managed a small nod, though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. There, she's fine, Wade said, trying to regain control of the situation. So, why don't you mind your own business and head back to whatever hole you crawled out of? Boone's response was to move faster than a man his size had any right to. His fist connected with Wade's jaw with a crack that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Wade spun and collapsed into the mud like a puppet with cut strings. Pike drew his knife and lunged, but Boone caught his wrist, twisted hard, and the blade fell uselessly to the ground. A knee to the gut folded Pike in half, and he joined Wade in the mud, gasping for air. Bulldog, showing slightly more sense than his companions, raised his hands and backed away. "We're done here. No more trouble?" "Smart man," Boone said. He turned to Wade, who was struggling to his hands and knees. "You and your friends are going to apologize to the lady now." Wade spat blood into the mud. For a moment it looked like he might refuse, but something in Boone's eyes convinced him otherwise. "Sorry," he mumbled, not looking at Eliza. "Louder." "I'm sorry," Wade shouted, genuine fear finally cracking through his bravado. Boone looked at Pike and Bulldog. They quickly echoed the apology. "Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you keep your teeth." The three men scrambled away, Wade limping, Pike clutching his stomach, and Bulldog supporting them both. The crowd began to disperse, the show over, though the whispers would continue for days. Boone bent down and picked up the silver dollar from the mud, wiping it clean on his coat before holding it out to Eliza. "This is yours. You don't owe them a damn thing." Eliza stared at the coin, then at the man offering it. Up close, she could see the scars on his knuckles, the gray threading through his dark beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years lived hard. But there was no cruelty in his face, only a bone-deep weariness and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the coin with shaking hands. I don't know how to repay you." "Don't need repayment, just doing what's right." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pick up your basket. Hold your head high. You got nothing to be ashamed of." He turned to leave, and Eliza found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Wait. Please, at least take some rolls. You must be hungry." Boone paused, then looked back at her. For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "I won't say no to that. Been eating my own cooking for 3 months, and it ain't fit for a coyote." Eliza quickly wrapped 4 of her best rolls in cloth and handed them to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt the calluses on his palms, hands that had seen hard work and harder times. "These smell good," he said simply. "Thank you, Miss Eliza Mayfield." "Jacob Callahan. Folks call me Boone." He tucked the rolls into his satchel. "You take care of yourself, Miss Mayfield." Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning crowd like a ghost, leaving Eliza standing by her stall with a pounding heart and a feeling she couldn't quite identify, something warm that cut through the lingering humiliation like sunlight through storm clouds. The weeks that followed were harsh even by Montana standards. Snow fell in heavy curtains, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze in buckets indoors. The boarding house was perpetually cold, despite the fire that Mrs. Holloway insisted was adequate, but clearly wasn't. Eliza went about her duties mechanically, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, hauling water from the well, cooking meals for the boarders who treated her like furniture. But in the quiet moments, when she lay in her tiny attic room wrapped in thin blankets, her mind drifted to the mountain man who had defended her when no one else would. She wondered where he was, if he was warm, if he thought about that day at all. She told herself she was being foolish. He had simply done a decent thing, nothing more. Men like him didn't think twice about women like her. But still, she wondered. It was late December when the Holloways summoned her to the main room. Mr. Holloway sat in his chair looking uncomfortable, while Mrs. Holloway stood with her arms crossed, her face set in hard lines. "We're letting you go," Mrs. Holloway announced without preamble. Eliza felt the floor drop out from under her. "What? But I've done everything you asked. I work hard. You cost us customers," Mr. Holloway interrupted, unable to meet her eyes. "Wade Garrett and his friends used to board here regular. After what happened at the market, they took their business elsewhere. Other customers followed. We can't afford to keep you on." "But where will I go? It's the middle of winter." Mrs. Holloway's expression didn't soften. "That's not our concern. You have until tomorrow morning to clear out." Eliza spent that night in a state of numb shock. She owned almost nothing: 2 dresses, a few undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small Bible that had belonged to her mother. She packed them into a worn carpet bag and tried not to think about what morning would bring. When dawn came, she stepped out into the bitter cold with nowhere to go. The boarding house door closed behind her with a finality that echoed in her chest. She walked through the nearly deserted streets, her breath forming crystals in the air. Most folks were smart enough to stay indoors on a day like this. She pulled her shawl tighter and tried to formulate a plan, but her mind kept circling back to the same truth. She had no money, no friends, and no prospects. In this cold, she wouldn't last more than a few days, sleeping rough. She was so lost in her dark thoughts that she didn't notice the figure standing outside the general store until she nearly walked into him. Miss Mayfield. She looked up into the weathered face of Boone Callahan. He was loading supplies onto a pack mule: salt, flour, coffee, ammunition. "Mr. Callahan," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I didn't expect to see you in town." His eyes, sharp as always, took in her carpetbag and the desperation she was trying to hide. "You leaving somewhere or arriving nowhere?" The question, delivered in his direct way, broke something inside her. Tears started to fall, and she couldn't stop them. "I've been let go from the boarding house. I have nowhere to go. I'm sorry. I don't mean to burden you with my troubles." "How much money you got?" The question surprised her. $3.40. Boone was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the mule's neck. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I got a cabin up in the mountains. Been living there alone for near 5 years now. It's got a roof that don't leak, a fireplace, and more room than one man needs." Eliza's breath caught. I don't understand." "I'm offering you a place to stay, through the winter at least. Won't pretend it's easy living up there, but you'll be warm and fed. In return, you help with the cooking, mending, keeping the place livable." He paused. "No obligations beyond that. You'll have your own space. I give you my word on that." She stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was offering. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're willing to work hard. I know you got nobody looking out for you, and I know what it's like to be—" He searched for the right word. "Alone." Eliza's mind raced. She knew what people would say about a single woman going to live with a single man in an isolated cabin. But those same people had already judged her, mocked her, and finally cast her out. What did their opinions matter when the alternative was freezing to death? More than that, something in Boone's eyes told her she could trust him. He had defended her when he had nothing to gain. He was offering help now when he could have simply walked away. "I'll earn my keep," she said firmly. "I'm a good cook, and I can sew, clean, do whatever needs doing." "I don't doubt it." He gestured to the mule. "We should head out soon. There's weather coming in tonight." The journey up the mountain took most of the day. Boone led the way on foot, the mule plodding behind, while Eliza struggled to keep pace through the deep snow. Her legs ached, her lungs burned from the thin, cold air, and several times she thought about asking to rest. But she pressed on, determined not to appear weak. Boone glanced back occasionally, his expression unreadable, but he never complained about her slower pace. When they stopped to water the mule at a frozen stream, he handed her a canteen and a piece of jerky without comment. "How much farther?" she asked. "Another hour, maybe 2. "You make this journey often?" 3-4 times a year for supplies. Otherwise, I stay put." "Don't you get lonely?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sometimes, but lonely's better than some alternatives." There was a story there, she knew, but she didn't press. They had time, and she sensed that Boone was not a man who shared easily. The cabin appeared as the sun began to set, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than Eliza had expected, a solid log structure with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, a large brown dog emerged, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rufus," Boone said. "He's more noise than threat." Rufus sniffed Eliza thoroughly before deciding she was acceptable, then trotted back to the porch. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well maintained. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a good fire burning. There was a sturdy table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair, and built-in bunks along the far wall. Furs covered the floor, and strings of dried herbs hung from the rafters. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and something else, a masculine scent that wasn't unpleasant. "You can have the lower bunk," Boone said, already unloading supplies. "I'll move my things to the upper. There's a curtain we can hang for privacy." Over the next hour, they worked together in comfortable silence. Boone showed her where things were kept, the root cellar out back, the spring house for cold storage, the small barn where he kept 2 horses and his trapping supplies. Eliza noted everything carefully, already thinking about how she could make herself useful. That first night, she cooked dinner with the supplies Boone had brought: venison stew with potatoes and onions, and biscuits that she made from scratch. She worked efficiently, aware of Boone watching her from his chair where he was mending a trap. When she set the bowls on the table, he looked at the meal with something like wonder. "Smells good. It's nothing fancy. It's not hardtack and beans, so to me, it's fancy." They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. When Boone finished, he sat back with a satisfied sound. "That's the best meal I've had in 5 years." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad." As winter deepened, they fell into a rhythm. Boone would rise before dawn to check his trap lines or hunt, while Eliza tended the fire, prepared meals, and worked on mending his worn clothes. In the afternoons, he taught her practical skills: how to split wood efficiently, how to skin a rabbit, how to recognize tracks in the snow. She proved to be an apt student, though her size sometimes made physical tasks challenging. Boone never commented on it, simply adjusted his teaching methods or found different ways to accomplish tasks. Evenings were spent by the fire. Sometimes Boone would read aloud from one of his few books, Shakespeare, surprisingly, or a volume of Whitman poems. Other times, Eliza would tell stories from her childhood, carefully edited versions that left out the worst parts. Slowly, carefully, They began to talk about real things. One night, as snow howled outside, Boone spoke about his past. "I was married once. Mary was her name. We had a little girl, Sarah. She was 4 years old." Eliza set down her sewing, hearing the pain in his voice. "Raiders came through while I was away scouting. Comancheros, mostly white men pretending to be Comanche. They burned our homestead, killed Mary and Sarah for the few horses we owned." His hands clenched. "I tracked them for 6 months, found every last one. And then? And then I came here. Figured I'd used up all my humanity dealing with them. Thought I'd just fade away in these mountains, become part of the wilderness. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He looked at her across the firelight. "Sometimes I wonder if that makes me a coward. Easier to hide than to live." "You're not hiding," Eliza said softly. "You're healing. There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. "What about you? What are you doing up here?" She considered her answer carefully. "Learning that maybe I'm worth more than the world told me I was." As January turned to February, Eliza began to notice changes in herself. The constant physical work was making her stronger, her body reshaping in subtle ways. But more than that, she felt different inside, more confident, more capable. She also became increasingly aware of Boone in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. The way his hands moved with such certainty when working, the rare smile that transformed his stern face, the gentleness he showed to the animals despite his rough exterior. She caught herself watching him more often than was proper, and sometimes she thought she caught him watching her too. One afternoon, while she was struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water from the spring, she slipped on the ice. Boone caught her before she fell, his strong arm steadying her. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Careful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you," she whispered, and neither of them moved. Then Rufus barked at something in the woods, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart quickly. That night, lying in her bunk with the curtain drawn, Eliza faced a truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Jacob Callahan. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and despair. How could she allow herself such foolishness? He had offered her shelter out of kindness, nothing more. A man like him, strong, capable, honorable, would never see her as anything but a charity case. And even if by some miracle he did, she couldn't bear the thought of becoming a burden, of him staying with her out of obligation rather than choice. She pressed her face into her pillow and cried silently, careful not to let him hear. On the other side of the curtain, Boone lay awake, staring at the ceiling, fighting his own battle. He had been alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to care about someone. But Eliza had somehow slipped past his defenses. Her quiet strength, her gentle humor, the way she never complained despite the hardships, all of it had worked its way into his heart without him realizing until it was too late. But what could he offer her? He was a scarred, haunted man living in isolation. She deserved better. Someone younger, someone without his darkness, someone who could give her a normal life. He told himself it was better to keep his distance, to maintain the careful balance they had achieved, but every day made it harder. March came with a late-season blizzard that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. On the second night, Eliza woke to the sounds of Boone thrashing in his sleep, caught in a nightmare. She hesitated, then pushed aside the curtain. In the dim firelight, she could see him on the upper bunk, his face twisted in anguish, muttering words she couldn't make out. "Boone," she called softly. "Boone, wake up." He didn't respond. She reached up and touched his shoulder, and suddenly he was awake, his hand catching her wrist in an iron grip, his eyes wild. "It's me," she said quickly. "It's Eliza. You were having a nightmare." Recognition flooded his face, and he released her immediately, sitting up and running his hands through his hair. "God, I'm sorry. Did I hurt you?" "No, I'm fine." She rubbed her wrist. It would bruise, but that didn't matter. "Do you want to talk about it?" "It's always the same. I arrive home, and I can't get there fast enough. I keep running, but I never make it in time." His voice broke. "I never make it in time." Without thinking, Eliza climbed up to sit beside him on the bunk. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I should have been there, should have protected them." "You can't protect everyone from everything. That's not how life works." She took his hand, feeling it tremble. "Your wife, Mary, would she want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself?" "No," he admitted. "She'd probably hit me with a skillet and tell me to stop being foolish." Eliza smiled. "She sounds like she was wonderful." "She was." He looked at their joined hands. "But she's gone, and I'm still here, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that." "Maybe you're supposed to keep living, keep finding reasons to get up each day, keep making space for joy, even if it feels impossible." They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, until Boone's breathing steadied and the nightmare's grip loosened. "Thank you," he said finally. "Any time." She started to climb down, but his voice stopped her. "Eliza, you've made this place feel like a home again. I want you to know that." Her heart swelled, and she had to swallow hard before she could answer. "You've given me a home when I had none. That's a gift I can never repay." April brought the slow, reluctant thaw. Snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. The creek swelled with runoff, and the first green shoots appeared in sheltered spots. Boone began making plans to take furs to trade in Dust Creek. "We should stock up before summer," he explained, "and you'll need new clothes. Yours are worn through." "I can mend them." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." His tone brooked no argument. "We'll get you what you need." The morning he planned to leave, Eliza woke early to pack provisions for his journey. But when she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Boone sitting at the table, his face troubled. "I'm coming with you," she announced before he could speak. "Eliza, I know what you're going to say, that it's too dangerous, that Wade and his friends might be there, but I can't hide forever, Boone, and I won't let fear control me any more." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we stay together, and at the first sign of trouble, we leave." They made the journey down the mountain, and Eliza felt a strange mixture of trepidation and pride. She wasn't the same woman who had fled up this mountain in despair. She had grown stronger, more capable, more sure of herself. Dust Creek looked exactly as she remembered, though perhaps slightly more run down. As they walked through the streets toward the general store, Eliza felt eyes on them, curious, judgmental, speculative. Let them look, she thought, holding her head high. They had just finished loading supplies when Eliza heard a familiar, hated voice. Well, well, the pig came back to town. Wade Garrett stood at the end of the street, flanked by Pike and Bulldog. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood 5 other men, all armed, all wearing the look of hired trouble. Boone stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the group. "We're not looking for trouble, Wade, just getting supplies and heading back." "See, that's the problem," Wade said, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. "Mr. Thornton, he's a land speculator from back east. He's been buying up property around here, including that mountain where you're squatting." A well-dressed man stepped forward. Thornton, presumably. "Mr. Callahan, I presume. I'm prepared to offer you fair compensation to vacate the premises." "Not interested," Boone said flatly. "That land isn't owned by anyone. I got as much right to it as anybody." "That's where you're wrong." Thornton smiled coldly. "I've purchased the deed from the territorial government. The land is mine now, legally speaking. You have 1 week to clear out, or I'll send these men to remove you." "You'd attack a man's home?" "I'd enforce my property rights. What happens during that enforcement? Well, accidents happen in the wilderness." Boone's hands clenched into fists, but Eliza could see him calculating the odds. 2 of them against 8 armed men in the middle of town. This wasn't a fight they could win. "We'll be gone by week's end," Boone said, the words clearly tasting like ash. They loaded their supplies in tense silence and began the journey back to the cabin. Eliza could feel the fury radiating off Boone, but he didn't speak until they were well out of town. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I brought you into this mess. This isn't your fault. Thornton and Wade, they're the ones choosing violence. Doesn't matter whose fault it is if we end up dead." He stopped, turning to face her. "There's a settlement 2 days north of here. I know people there. I can get you passage on a wagon train heading to Oregon. You'd be safe." "What about you?" "I'll figure something out. Maybe head into Canada or—" "No." The word came out fierce, surprising them both. "We stay together. Eliza, these men won't hesitate to hurt you to get at me. Then we fight them together, or we run together, but I'm not leaving you, Boone, not now." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, fear, and something deeper. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." She took a breath, committing to the truth she'd been holding back. "I love you, Jacob Callahan. I don't expect you to feel the same, and I know I'm not the kind of woman men want, but that doesn't change how I feel. So if you think I'm going to abandon you when you need someone, you're wrong." Boone stared at her, his face a mixture of shock and wonder. "Not the kind of woman men want?" He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Eliza, I've been half in love with you since that day in the market. Completely in love with you since about 2 weeks into winter. I just didn't dare hope that you could see anything in a broken-down old wolf like me." Now it was Eliza's turn to stare. You love me?" "With everything I've got left." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "You're not too much, Eliza. The world's just too small for you. You're brave and kind and strong, and you make me believe I might deserve a second chance at living." Tears streamed down her face as he pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, solid and real. "We'll figure this out," he murmured into her hair. "Together." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Boone set traps around the cabin's perimeter, not the kind for animals, but ones designed to slow down and disorient attackers. He cached weapons at strategic points and showed Eliza how to load and fire his rifles. "I'm not asking you to kill anyone," he said, "but if it comes to it, you need to be able to defend yourself." On the fourth night, they came. Eliza woke to Rufus's low growling. Boone was already up, rifle in hand, peering through the shuttered window. "8 of them," he said quietly. "Wade's leading. They're trying to surround the cabin. What do we do? We make them wish they'd stayed in town." The first shots came through the door, splintering wood. Boone returned fire through the gun ports he'd carved in the shutters, and someone screamed in pain. The attack stalled momentarily as the men sought cover. "Callahan!" Wade's voice rang out. "Send out the girl, and we'll let you leave with your life." "Like hell!" Boone shouted back. He looked at Eliza. "There's a root cellar with a tunnel that leads to the barn. If things go bad, you run. Promise me." "Boone, promise me." "I promise." The battle became a nightmare of smoke and noise. Boone moved from window to window, picking his shots carefully, while Eliza reloaded rifles with shaken hands. The attackers set fire to the barn, and flames lit up the night, destroying their escape route. One of the shutters splintered under repeated blows. A man started to climb through, and Eliza, acting on instinct, swung an iron skillet with all her strength. It connected with a satisfying crunch, and the man fell back, unconscious. "Good girl," Boone said grimly. But they were being overwhelmed. Boone had taken a bullet in the shoulder, and blood soaked his shirt. They were running low on ammunition. Eliza could see defeat approaching like a storm. Then, impossibly, gunfire erupted from outside, but not aimed at the cabin. Through the shattered window, Eliza saw figures emerging from the tree line, rifles blazing. At their head rode old Jeremiah from the market, along with the widow Chen, the Miller brothers, and at least a dozen others from Dust Creek. "Figured you could use a hand," Jeremiah called out. "Turns out not everyone in town likes Thornton's methods." The tide turned swiftly. Caught between two forces, Wade's men threw down their weapons and fled into the darkness. Wade himself made it to his horse, but Boone, despite his injury, ran him down and delivered one final devastating punch that left him unconscious in the mud. As dawn broke over the mountains, the townspeople helped extinguish the remaining fires. Jeremiah explained that word had spread about Thornton's plans, and enough people remembered Boone defending Eliza that they decided to return the favor. "Besides," the widow Chen added, "Thornton's been buying up property and pushing folks around for months. This seemed like a good time to push back." The territorial marshal, arriving 2 days later, was less than impressed with Thornton's deed, which turned out to be fraudulent. Thornton and what remained of his hired men were arrested, and Wade Garrett found himself facing charges of arson and attempted murder. In the aftermath, Boone recovered slowly. Eliza tended his wound with the same fierce devotion she brought to everything. As spring fully bloomed, they began rebuilding, not just the barn, but their lives. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Boone took Eliza's hand. "Marry me," he said simply. "That's not a question," she teased. "I'm not asking. I'm stating a fact. You're going to marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Well, when you put it that way." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yes, Jacob Callahan, I'll marry you." The wedding took place in June in a small clearing near the cabin. Jeremiah officiated, since he'd been a preacher before becoming a butcher. The widow Chin provided flowers, and the Miller brothers brought moonshine that was actually drinkable. A handful of others from Dust Creek made the journey up the mountain, bearing gifts and well wishes. Boone wore his cleanest buckskins, his beard freshly trimmed. Eliza wore a simple white dress that the widow Chin had helped her sew, her hair braided with wildflowers. When Jeremiah asked if Boone would take Eliza as his wife, he answered in his characteristic way, "She's my peace after war. Of course I will." Eliza's vows came through tears of joy. He saw beauty where the world saw shame. He saw strength where I saw weakness. He gave me a home when I had none, and in return I give him my heart, my life, and every tomorrow I'm given. As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, two broken souls made whole by finding each other, the assembled guests cheered. Rufus barked enthusiastically. The mountains stood as witnesses to a love that had grown in the harshest of soils and bloomed all the stronger for it. That night, in their rebuilt cabin, as a soft rain drummed on the roof, Eliza lay in Boone's arms and thought about the journey that had brought her here, from humiliation in a dusty market to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. That sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. You sound like a philosopher. I sound like a woman who's been given more than she ever dared hope for. He kissed the top of her head. That makes two of us. In the years that followed, the story of the mountain man and the girl he defended became something of a legend in Dust Creek. People spoke of it in hushed tones, how love had bloomed in the harshest of winters, how courage had triumphed over cruelty, how two people whom the world had cast aside had found everything they needed in each other. Sometimes, on clear summer days, travelers passing through the mountains would glimpse a large man and a strong woman working together in their garden, a brown dog playing at their feet, smoke rising from their cabin chimney. If they looked closely, they might see the way the couple moved together, comfortable and sure, and the way they looked at each other like the other person was the most miraculous thing in the world. And they were right, because in a world that often measured worth by shallow standards, Jacob and Eliza had found something deeper, a love that saw past surfaces to the souls beneath, a partnership built on respect and survival, a home carved out of wilderness and want. They had started with nothing but each other and built everything that mattered. And on cold Montana nights, when the wind howled through the pines and snow fell like memories, they would sit by their fire, hands clasped, hearts full, knowing that they had found what so many spend their whole lives searching for, someone who saw them, truly saw them, and chose to stay.